technical difficulties. And I was saying, I'm Valeria Gomez from Pinecone. Today's guest is Bryan McCann, co-founder and CTO at you.com, an AI assistant that executes tasks based on user intent, providing actionable answers with personalization. And I'm sure all of us are familiar with traditional internet search. However, for nearly 20 years, there has been very little innovation in this field. Bryan and team shared a vision to replace internet search with AI assistants capable of comprehending user intent and providing personalized context-aware results. In this conversation, we will explore how you.com is pioneering a new era of AI assistant, leveraging advanced machine learning technologies and Pinecone to deliver personalized responses to questions with human-like replies. And before we kick it off with chat with Bryan, we would love to hear from all of you tuning in live today. Drop your questions and comment in the chat, and we will be answering a few of them at the end of the conversation. Now, Bryan, welcome. We are very excited about this chat and explore more what makes you.com possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks to everyone who's joined the live stream to tune in. I'm excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. So what about you give us a little overview of your role at you.com and your background with large language models and a little bit about generative AI.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. Yeah, I'm the CTO at you.com. I co-founded it with our CEO Richard Socher back in August 2020. So we've been in the AI startup space for a number of years now. We came out of Salesforce research together, where he was the chief scientist and I was leading some of the natural language processing research. We were there for about 4+ years, and my whole kind of thesis and direction and my research while I was there was unified approaches to natural language processing. When I started out, I come out of a philosophy background with some computer science on the side, mostly for fun, but I got really interested in this question of meaning, and then looking at how AI was working, how we could teach models how to understand language and then have them do things rather than having models designed specifically for different tasks. And yeah, so that led us to some of our work trying to push towards transfer learning or multitask learning, eventually like more unified models across modalities. And we ended up training some of the largest open source language models in the world at the time. Pretty small by large by today's standards, but yeah, we've been in the Gen AI space since maybe before the beginning in some sense, and continue to experiment with new business models now with you.com alongside the technology.
I mean, I'm really fascinated how your journey took you from the academic realm and now to the industry. And you just, you mentioned a little bit about your paper about unified NLP model. You were the lead author there in 2018, right? If I recall correctly, I believe this paper was rejected by anonymous peer reviewers. But then a year later, the founding team at OpenAI cited it when they introduced GPT-2. Also, I know you didn't mention that, but I know that you invented prompt engineering and contextual word vectors. Is that correct? With all of these, awesome. So with all of this background, can you walk us through how that transition, with all your research, really impacted your perspective and approach to AI?
Yeah, when we started out, I was kind of mentioning how we were pushing for transfer learning with like contextualized word vectors and more unified models. And at the time when we started, this was 2015, 2016, most people were not doing that. And so in some sense, it felt really impactful because it actually wasn't clear, if I didn't do it, then it wasn't clear that anybody was going to do it. And that was very evident in some of the rejections we got during the peer review process. But that was, the vision, and that was the goal. So it was very important for us to just keep at it. And I think our research team did a great job kind of pushing from different angles. And that kind of sense of impact was really important for us while we were at research. And when we were starting U.com and everything, I think we carried some of that forward, trying to look for things that we could apply the technology to, that it really wasn't clear whether other people were going to be doing it, especially in the early days. But then after 3 or 4 years of doing the research, we saw a lot of the NLP community pick up this approach, adopt the direction, especially when OpenAI came out with GPT-2. That was like a huge change for the research community. And then something similar has happened, in the broader kind of trend in AI, where ChatGPT and everything kind of did the same thing for a more broader kind of change in perspective on how things could be done in AI. So yeah, U.com has been kind of right in the thick of that, just like we were on the research side. And even though you get rejected sometimes, you got to push for those things and push for what you think is right in the right direction. So it's great to continue that with U.com.
Definitely. And, U.com has stood out to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, the AI assistant is great at retrieving information. But also, number two, there are different ways to use U.com tailored to different needs and tasks to provide the best answers. So to kind of take a little bit of step back, what inspired you to co-found the company? And when did you decide AI would be such a fundamental part of your product?
Yeah, well, AI was kind of the starting point for the product. So I guess it is kind of the fundamental part of the product. I remember when I met Richard back in 2013-ish, when we were both students, he had a demo of just things he was hacking on, and things that like maybe could be search in the future. And we didn't know how to make any of that stuff work. Really, just having something write out stories for you based on your searches or something like that. But after we put in all this time into research and working on how to get these models to do something, once we saw the inflection point coming, even with much smaller models than today, things that weren't really working as well, that was kind of the impetus for the company, because we were seeing that AI was really starting to understand in a different way, and kind of pushing that forward while also seeing the potential impact it can have is just kind of in our DNA. So we realized that all the ways we interact with information, different applications, just like technology, generally speaking, was probably going to change with a greater understanding of language. It might become more of like the interface we use for everything. And we wanted to be working in a space where that could have like the broadest and deepest positive impact possible. So, that's essentially at the moment people start typing something into a box somewhere on their phone or their computer, which is often associated with search but it's where they start their journey, looking for knowledge and trying to get things done. So U.com really came out of that and wanting to be part of that process as I think the world figures out how to interact with information differently, and trying to push it in a direction that is more about like finding more and more information and kind of having a fulfilled intent when you make a query, which can include lots of actions and having things actually done for you, which is more of the assistant kind of angle, rather than, just getting a bunch of blue links and having to kind of wade your way through the mud of the rest of the internet sometimes.
And I would love to go a little bit deeper into this journey. So can you share a little bit about the development process and the technological advancement that you enable for the AI assistant particularly?
Yeah. Yeah, the assistant itself, is built upon many, many layers of abstraction and tooling that many of which didn't even exist a few years ago, which is pretty fun and exciting. Pinecone and other search and retrieval technologies for sure. I remember when we were just starting, I think Pinecone was still very early on too, and this idea of like managed vector databases and whole companies built around vector databases was pretty new.
Mhm.
But having these different layers built up kind of for us and in parallel has really been key for us to have like a culture of innovation ourselves to put these things together and focus on the core technology that we're building. For me personally, like I've learned how to balance that pure research approach from before to developing totally new technology with the process of building an excellent high quality product that has to
Mhm.
serve millions and millions of people and millions and millions of queries. And I guess just in terms of development process, I guess I think it really starts with the team itself. I have an incredible team, and each of them at every part of the stack has made really novel contributions to U.com, the AI assistant. It's been super impressive, and they're using AI more and more in the loop. A lot of internal tooling is getting built, so I think really having that culture of innovation that grows with everything else that other people are working on, like Pinecone, has been essential for us over the last few years, and um, is really starting to pay more and more dividends as we kind of go into the future here and AI gets more established.
And kind of following this culture of innovation, in January, you launched youth.com's AI modes, right? Which include smart, genius, research, and create, right?
Mhm.
How these modes work and what are they trying to solve for the general public? For what I can really tell when I was playing with them, they can understand and truly solve multi-step problems for just a person just like me trying to use them.
Yeah. So we kind of have three different modes, and then some additional ones that I'll talk about too. But there's smart mode, genius mode, research mode. Those are my big three that I'll use. And then there's a create mode that people can use, and there's also custom models. Um, and smart mode is mostly where we started. That's a conversational multi-turn retrieval augmented generation system over the entire web. And it's what you would think of if you were, trying to design a chatbot that is grounding its responses in citations over sources that it can get from the web, all the search and retrieval foundations that it's built on top of. It's aiming for conciseness, trying to be fast. Whereas Genius Mode, that's something that you can use to code for you. And for people familiar with like code generative tools, like it will generate code, but then it will actually run it in a Python sandbox. So it can use different Python libraries, and we're adding more and more tools over time. And I think of Genius Mode as kind of our general agent tool using mode. So that's where we're putting a lot of that experimentation. Research mode is pretty interesting because uh, it kind of has some of the agentic flavor actually in the tech stack underneath. It's not using necessarily the same kind of search, bring results in, pass into a language model pipeline that smart mode or a traditional like RAG system would have. Um, it's optimizing for like the freshest, the most comprehensive results you can possibly have. So we do a lot of like really updated crawling, querying different APIs or whatever we need to do to get the freshest information possible. And this creates really comprehensive responses. So you'll see the responses are a lot longer. They take a little bit longer to get, but from my experience, they're essentially hallucination free as well, which is like a huge problem in the space right now. And yeah, I love this mode. I'll probably talk about it more later. But then there's also create, so you can create a lot of new images using AI image generation tools. And there's also a custom models. So that's where you can play with anything from Anthropic's Claude series or Cohere's Command series or open source models that we include, the Databricks model that came out recently. So custom model mode is a little bit for users that really want to dig into different models themselves. These other modes are there with specific kind of types of queries that they're best for. And that's been really helpful also for kind of slowly educating users that aren't necessarily used to typing in some of these queries into, their search box or their, chatbot input, because they can be quite complicated. And like you said, they can be multiple turns. So that helps us kind of guide people along sometimes. But, in the long run, based on my background, it's just a natural tendency. I'll probably want to unify things again. So right now, this is kind of a new technology. A lot of people are learning about it. Makes sense to have these split modes, but I think eventually it'll come back around, and we'll have a more unified approach as well. So just as a heads up for people, maybe not in the short term, but over the next few months or years.
That's really cool. So people can really use the different modes depending on what they're trying to accomplish. And so which one is your favorite AI mode?
Right now, my favorite one, the one I use all the time, is research mode. It's just an incredible way to learn about things. It's like having custom Wikipedia pages written for me or something like that. It has that level of trust that I feel is so often missing in some of these AI assistants and chatbots out there that are just RAG or just a language model. So I love it. I think it's the best. It's the first time that I really don't have to click into any new tabs whenever I make those queries or anything. So it's my favorite. It's the one that I tell people to use whenever I meet them and show them our app and stuff like that.
I need to try that mode too then. So it seems that these modes use different kind of natural language models paired with third-party models, just truly to select the best model for each specific kind of question or user intent at this point. If we go a little bit deeper into that, can you share some insights into the technology stack and the different methodologies your team used to develop these modes? I know you mentioned RAG, but anything else that you can share? I'm really curious about the tools, the frameworks, or any kind of approaches that you use to bring these vision to life.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is because it's RAG, there are search foundations. And I'm really glad that we spent time there building out all of the infrastructure that can go into that so that we can have, in my view, kind of a different kind of index of the web. We still use both lexical and vector-based approaches to indexing at times and for different kinds of data sources. And we're really aiming for this kind of index that is built and designed with LLMs in the loop for deciding what kind of information goes in, for deciding how that information goes in. And it's also designed for LLMs to consume, since, we don't need an index that necessarily provides 10 blue links so that humans can click on them. We're really trying to provide the best information for a language model, and then the language model writes out the final answer. So it actually turns out, instead of having a ginormous, massive index, sometimes you can optimize things differently, given that the world has large language models now. And, the vector part is incredibly important for us, just so we can train things. So Pinecone has been a great partner pretty much since the beginning, because we got, I guess maybe there's too much detail, but, we got on like a managed version and in the very early days. And that was just a lifesaver for us, I think, in terms of the time and energy we had to invest into that part of the stack. And we've been on Pinecone ever since. So great job for you guys. Thank you for keeping up with everything and supporting us. And the rest of it, we call it our LLMOS, so like a large language modeling operating system. So folks in the community might have heard this term in various ways. For us, it's applying to our entire LLM orchestration layer. There's so much that goes into deciding, which prompts to use, like you said, based on the query, based on the user's intent, which models to use, where we're deploying, how we're deploying, whether to personalize things, whether we should use searches, whether we're just chatting. All of these decisions are being made by AI within the system itself to get to that final response. And so it's a constantly evolving stack. And then when you go into the different modes, you'll have very different flows, but we are PyTorch shop, some of the basics are still PyTorch shop. That was my go-to when I was doing research and serving us well. And yeah, we do a bunch of our own infrastructure and everything too, but I think those are some of the big ones.
Do you also use your own embedded models for your vectors, or do you use a third party?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've experimented with both. We'll actually use different things for different use cases again. We're very pragmatic. So for example, code embedding models might be running those that are different from the ones we're using for search and ranking. And I've found that it's actually really important for us to have our own models there to get the most benefit from vector databases. I think it can make a huge difference if you're training on your own data and using some of that signal that only your users can really give you. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there, but it makes a huge difference for us.
For sure. So a lot goes into building, products, especially AI products. So what were some of the key challenges you faced while building U.com AI assistants or any of the AI modes?
Yeah, great question. So there are some of the ones that I think users are very familiar with, like hallucinations, lack of credible sources. Even when you do cite things and you're not trying to hallucinate, you might still have sources that are wrong, or they're just not credible, or your user doesn't trust. Outdated responses, again, that can come down to either freshness of your index or wherever you're getting information from. And each of those has kind of presented its own unique challenge for how we build these different modes. Sometimes writing code and using an API just is the best way to do it, and so Genius Mode holds a lot of potential there for automating a lot of that for people. Obviously, we do some of that, but Genius Mode, I think, is a really promising tool for the future, especially as things become more and more API-ified so that AI can access it. Research Mode has its own approach to dealing with hallucinations. We spend a lot more time, and there are like more models checking the responses, and that's why you'll see Research Mode's answers take extra time. But we're checking those sources. We're checking for hallucination. We're actually like going onto individual pages and making sure that the language model not only cites, but the citation is accurate and faithful to the information there. And so that part of RAG, not just retrieving and augmenting and generating, but like pairing these things like Pinecone, with custom embedding models, and then bringing in all these other models around it in the LMOS to build a trustworthy response. A lot of that just goes into like concerted effort over time and gathering the data to have the models improve as well, and like developing those flywheels. So yeah, the models and the modes are, I think, finally like really delivering. And yeah, again, I think it's in a great part because of the team I have and all the little tweaks they're doing to prompts and different parts of the system.
Yeah, that's for sure. All of these challenges are real, and we hear it often. Hallucinations, lack of credible sources, outdated responses. That's just something that you really need to overcome when you're building these generative AI applications. Anything else? Any other techniques that your team is using or use to overcome these challenges? I would love to hear anything that you have used or any of your point of view, anything that from your research that you think it would be kind of helpful here.
Yeah, I think the last thing maybe I'll mention too, it doesn't matter which methods you're trying to get to work, like your combination of model, your combination of prompt and embedding model, maybe We do some rewriting for users and kind of write new queries for them to help them. All of these things should be plugged into a process that is gradually improving those things over time based on the data you have. So this is one of the things that's, again, quite nice about working with Pinecone, because those embeddings are changing. They're part of the learning system that is our AI assistant. And so for us, we still get in the weeds. Like, we kind of have this culture of innovation, but also like a building culture. And we love to just like get into data whenever we can, look at it, work with agencies to see how we're doing, get third-party evaluations, run a lot of A/B tests, and kind of calibrate all of these things, correlate them so that an individual engineer can, work on an evaluation, like a test set internally for one specific model, but we kind of know how improvements in that model, say improvements in our custom embedding model, are going to lead to improvements in downstream metrics like conversion or subscription rates and things like that. So I think that's been a really interesting part of not only doing AI research, but also trying to build a product and a company around it, establishing all these connections. And it's an ever-changing process. So a lot of fun.
Yes, and I can just imagine. I do know that you have a very diverse background. And I know we didn't touch a little bit in that, but I know you started philosophy along with computer science. So you really bring this unique perspective, right, into your work. So how do you think this kind of interdisciplinary approach really influence the way that you view the field of AI? And I ask because I think it's really fascinating to think how, ideas from philosophy can connect with just the really technical aspect of computer science. So from your perspective, how do you see these kind of two different perspectives coming together in your work?
Yeah. Yeah, I've always felt that the studying philosophy and computer science were very complementary, and they were very complementary ways of thinking. For me, the way they fit together, not only do they just kind of get my mind working in really rigorous ways, but philosophy kind of gets me thinking about big ideas and a little in the clouds a little bit, but you're trying to literally like use language and sometimes come up with new language to describe things and ideas that we don't have great language to describe, or we don't really know what we're talking about, right? So it's literally this like process for me of developing language to talk about experiences or ideas, and giving space to like be in the clouds a little bit and have that really long-term vision or think about where things could go. And then the computer science part of my brain and thinking and training, then can look at that stuff and think about how to build it and whether it's possible, and kind of ground it in these kind of technical approaches. And I think when those come together, you get this nice blend of thinking about new ideas and literally trying to create language to talk about them. And then having technical methods that ground that and keep it close enough to the earth. You're not so far in the clouds that it's possible on different time horizons, whether it's next week, or in a year or 5 years. Thinking about when we started in research and working on unified approaches for NLP, our research mode is, something I could have only dreamed of, and it would have been like a philosophical question in some sense 10 years ago when we started. But the kind of technical grounding along the way allowed us to like plot a course, even though we didn't know exactly how to get there. You feel it out. And I think it's really interesting to watch really like kind of the whole world right now do this philosophical process of trying to figure out, what is this AI stuff? How do we talk about it? What are we seeing happen? People coming up with all sorts of like metaphors to try to understand what is going on when they use it and what it means for them. And it's just like, that's, I guess, at the heart of what I find really interesting, outside of just building the stuff and kind of serving our users. So I'm excited to see the world continue to do that, and I hope you.com and our AI assistant will play a really positive role in it.
Of course, and I am sure it is. I'm very impressed with the product, and I'm really fascinated how it really takes the, the person and that's why it's called you. It's because it's about you. So I'm pretty sure that you hear that from your users very often. So we are almost at time with the Q&A. What about we just close this part of the conversations with some kind of words of wisdom? You have a lot of experience, right? You have just also building you.com, but also from your research and from your experiences in college. Do you have any recommendations for the audience currently thinking about investing in AI, or for those that are not investing in AI? And also for those that don't have that kind of background, right? There is a lot of engineers that don't have a research background or machine learning background or an artificial intelligence background that really want to kind of start in this field. Any tips and tricks?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you want to get started, just get started. That's the number one. Get started, find something. If you're reading stuff online, if you're finding some of the classes, that people have used over time, like Richard's class that he started, at Stanford, the 224 N and D series, any of the deep learning classes that are going on out there, they're really great. I would start building, if you want to get into it as well, and surround yourself with other people, either virtually, or in person if you can, that know a bunch about it. I think when I first got started, I was definitely that like really annoying person probably that sat next to the other engineers and scientists and just asked constant questions and would see something come up in my lost chart and be like, what the heck is that? Like, have you seen that before? Have you seen that before? Have you seen that before? And I think creating that community around it, for yourself and for others, the way that in some sense you are right now by doing these podcasts, it goes a long way, and that will make a huge difference for probably the other people that are involved too. So, you're doing people a favor and you're learning a lot along the way. And then I would say, try to, amongst all of the really rapid change, I would say, people talk about like how fast it's moving and things like that. And it's always kind of felt like it's moving fast though, ever since I started in the field, at least. There were already way too many papers. You could not read them all, and sifting through things to really gather the most important information for yourself and the most important things you can learn was a process to balance alongside having your own ideas and believing in them. So you have to, going back to, kind of my early story on the research side, there was a constant flow of information that I could have spent all of my days easily and more, just ingesting and consuming and trying to understand. If I didn't sometimes like shut that off in some sense, literally, like, and have to take a week and be like, I'm not going to read any research papers, this week. If there are anything important comes out, I'm sure the people around me will tell me about it. I want to just really think deeply about an experiment on my own. Doesn't matter which, tools I'm using for this week, just like I'm going to code it however I'm going to code it. I'm going to use whatever I find. I'm going to try out these ideas. I think that allowed, at least me and Richard to some extent to kind of stay on track towards that long-term vision, and not necessarily like get too pulled in different directions. So I think that's important too, like develop your own sense of where you think things are going. Try to keep that as simple as possible. Stick to your gut on that, and then have a lot of conviction, high conviction about it, but then be open to new evidence and data and change. So high conviction, but then in light of new evidence, quickly change your mind. Yeah, those are some of the things that I think we still try to develop in our culture at u.com today.
Thank you for sharing that. High conviction, get started, lead on your community, be curious, and just kind of have the path of vision. Just kind of go with your gut.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of questions in the chat. Should we address a few of them? We do have some time.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So let me read. I'm going to kind of have my screen here. So George Portillo is asking, how do you simmer down large amounts of information into the duplicated list of items?
Yeah, I'm going to interpret that in the context of the u.com AI assistant, not me personally, but I do kind of use u.com for that sometimes. Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a lot of layers to it. You can kind of think of it like a sieve or something like that, right? Or like a funnel. So we're constantly going out and proactively gathering a bunch of information, right? Crawling and using different APIs. And there's all sorts of models along the way that are making decisions or about whether to allow that any of that information to like proceed to the next step. So let's say we find a page on the internet. Even if we've gotten to that page, there are systems that have decided we should get there for a variety of reasons, whether it's a source that we trust, whether it's a source that someone specifically has requested. And then we're tagging all of that information with different attributes and things we think will be useful to know later on. Then when it's actually like in our index, whether it's the vector based indices or the lexical based indices, we are using like a hybrid approach there. You can use a lot of that metadata to filter down and get to the kind of results that you're looking for in a pretty categorical kind of way. So if someone's asking for a very specific technical question, then we're immediately filtering out a bunch of the internet that doesn't matter. And then there's all sorts of more fuzzy things that you're doing along the way too. Vector-based search, like approximate nearest neighbors, is itself like kind of fuzzy. And there are like ranking approaches. Once we get a certain number of results that we apply as we get closer and closer to the user, we'll potentially, if the users have enabled it, use some of the personalization information to then decide further what is relevant to them. And that's kind of, there's actually earlier steps for that too. And then at the end of the day, at this point, it's almost like, I don't know, I'm starting to feel like the actual order of the sources isn't as important as just having the sources and having more information from those sources so the language models can digest it and provide the best response for me. So yeah, there's a lot of layers basically. Information that gets to you has gone through a lot of steps and verification. Different models have seen it.
Thank you for that really thoughtful answer. Hopefully that helped George. And I have another one and I'm going to kind of combine. So somebody's asking, is adaptive RAG another kind of RAG? And kind of follow up with that, any recommendations on adaptive RAG techniques?
Yeah, interesting. I think what we're going to see is a bunch of different like variations of RAG techniques, and there will probably be more and more until we have it like really mastered. So I would encourage people to try whatever they can get their hands on there. For us, RAG has been primarily about like making sure we have the right stuff in the index and making sure we can get enough of the information from the documents to allow the language models to ground their answers. So I think everything else on top of that has been, some optimizations on the RAG side, and as part of like our data flywheel. I think the really interesting stuff that's happening alongside RAG is some of the personalization part of it is proving to be really, really interesting for users, and checking those sources. And like it's kind of tricky because you're running this whole big complicated system to give you this answer, and then it feels sometimes like it's just as hard to make sure that the answer is actually right. So I think the verification part, making sure answers are consistent and correct and grounded, is where we're spending the majority of our time at this point.
Awesome, thank you. Stefan has a question, and it's about chunking. So he would like to actually know your approach to chunking data. How do you have any advice for semantic chunking or the best chunking strategies when it comes to large amounts of data? I know chunking is a whole another different kind of topic on its own, but maybe a little high level kind of tips.
Yeah, I might have an unsatisfying answer here. That all of our chunking also depends, heavily on the area, the domain, because we're doing the whole web. We cover so many different kinds of data. It depends a lot on the domain. I will say, there are sweet spots that I think it's hard to deviate too much from sometimes. You don't want your chunks to be like too small, I would say. Otherwise, at least if you're running things at scale, it becomes like very, very expensive, and your indexes become very, very large. And you're actually losing context in some of those chunks as well. So my advice, if possible, start out with something pretty basic or default, however long you can fit into a window for your embedding system or something like that. And then experiment for your domain, like your data. Try to find something that balances the kind of context you're looking for with the minimum kind of information you need for that unit. Another basic thing to do, if you haven't tried it, is to make sure your chunks overlap a little bit, so that sometimes you can't necessarily, like if you're trying to do this very quickly and at a large scale, maybe you're not running a very expensive model over something to decide, okay, this is where this information or like semantic unit kind of ends. Give yourself like a little overlap between chunks so that you can capture some of that context hopefully.
Awesome. We only have time for one more question. We have a bunch of others, but Zhang Il say great section. He wants to know, how do you deal with response time SLA for you.com?
Yeah, great question. So like latency, for example, response time is pretty much like, I mean, it's essentially part of quality, especially when you're trying to serve users in the consumer space like this. You can have like the best response in the world, but people still want it to be as fast as possible. I will say, research mode takes a little bit longer, but it's the first time I think in quite a while, maybe since like ChatGPT started, that user behavior has changed where people are willing to wait longer for those responses. So I think there's something kind of like really discreet in how we like think about this, maybe unconsciously. Like you want it to be as fast as possible always, but if the answer is going to be like 10 times better or some threshold better, then you're willing to wait. Now, of course, you want that to be as fast as possible too, but you're willing to wait for this, and then competition is great, because then other people do something similar and you kind of push each other to take it faster again. But for us, yeah, we're constantly monitoring the response times, trying to find ways to make things faster. A lot of times, speed doesn't necessarily have the language models as a bottleneck, because I think so much of the community is spending time on the models and the inference servers and deployment and things like that, that a lot of times we have to just be very careful about, hey, we don't add, additional latency in our, JavaScript or, inside like our backend somewhere else. And so yeah, it's really like a full stack thing we're keeping track of all the time. We have lots of dashboards for things like that and alerts.
For sure. Bryan, we are at time. It has been a pleasure chatting with you today, learning about your journey, about you.com, and the amazing things that you're doing. Uh, People want to know more. I see a lot of questions. How can they connect with you? How they can learn more about you.com?
Yeah, there's so many ways. So me personally, you can look me up on Twitter. You can tweet some of your questions at me if you want. I'm B Marcus McCann, and I will try to keep answering them. Or if you see any threads, I think the Twitter community has so much going on in the AI space. So if you see any threads that you think would be interesting for me to take a look at, my thoughts on, feel free to mention me. We also have, I know a couple like LinkedIn posts and things like that that the Pinecone team and our team have put out there. So feel free to follow up questions there. You can also email us if you really want to email us. You can do hey@u.com or something like that. But I would love to kind of share some of the answers and questions with more people. So if people follow up on Twitter, I think that'd be the best way for us. And then you should definitely check out u.com. Yeah.
For sure. We may have to.
YOU.com.
It's very easy. You just put it there in the search box and it's gonna just take you right away. We may have to bring you back to another, episode. People really want to learn from you.
Please do. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for listening today. We'll be here again next month chatting with AI founders and engineers about the amazing AI products they are creating. Until then, thank you for joining.